Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia Channel. The book that this program interprets for you is called Winning Now, Winning Later: How Companies Can Succeed in the Short Term While Investing for the Long Term. The author is David Cote, Chinese name Gao Dewei, the former chairman and CEO of Honeywell, a Fortune 500 company, and a member of the board of directors of JPMorgan Chase. Advisor to KKR Group. One of the problems that many company managers often face is, if they want to impact short-term good performance, they may sacrifice the long-term health of the company, and if they want to lay out long-term strategies, they may not be able to take care of short-term performance. Long-term and short-term seem to be a contradiction. So, how to achieve short-term growth and long-term development at the same time, these two seemingly contradictory goals? What is intellectually rigorous thinking? How to establish this mode of thinking? After listening to this episode, you will understand. When David Cote took over Honeywell in 2002, the industrial manufacturing company was in deep trouble and on the verge of bankruptcy. What was handed over to him was a veritable bad company. However, when he stepped down from Honeywell in 2018, the company had become one of the top 500 companies in the world, and its market value had soared from $20 billion to $120 billion. How did David Cote do it all? That is, focus on short-term performance, but invest in long-term growth. According to David Cote, short-termism is one of the most harmful prevailing ideas in business today. With this mindset, a company leader may take it for granted that it is impossible to pursue both long-term and short-term goals at the same time, and choose to mobilize all forces in pursuit of short-term results. But in fact, short-term performance and long-term performance are not a set of contradictions. David Cote believes that by establishing intellectual rigor thinking and making strategic deployments under the guidance of this thinking, we can completely achieve these two goals at the same time. Here comes a word: intellectual rigor. This name sounds very profound, but what it actually wants to say is that many times, the reason why we feel that we have to make a choice in the face of two contradictory things is because we regard them as two ends of a straight line. One end cannot go to the other end. But in fact, these two things may be in different dimensions, rather than two ends of a line. For example, the short-term performance and long-term strategy that this book focuses on, David Cote believes that they are just two different dimensions to promote the company's growth, and there is no absolute opposition. In addition to choosing one of the two, we actually have the ability a third option that takes care of both of these things. Such a way of thinking was cultivated by David Cote during his financial management work at General Electric in his early years. At that time, he often had to face the situation of choosing between two different goals. For example, is it high yield or high quality? Is it high sales or high profits? Should the decision-making power be handed over to the frontline employees or should it be held in their own hands? Etc. In the process, he discovered that all of these things are fundamentally an intellectual exercise. Only when you are willing to constantly think about business and reflect on problems with a rigorous and curious thinking habit, can you do two seemingly contradictory things at the same time. And the story we want to tell in this episode is the ultimate practice of David Cote's intellectually rigorous thinking. That is, how to lead Honeywell, a traditional industrial manufacturing company, to complete changes that can benefit the company in the long run while taking into account short-term rapid growth. Next, we interpret it in two parts. The first part, how David Cote established this intellectually rigorous thinking throughout Honeywell. The second part, under the guidance of this thinking, how Honeywell achieved short-term growth and long-term development at the same time. First part. Let's now look at how David Cote established this intellectually rigorous thinking throughout Honeywell. In February 2002, David Cote became CEO of Honeywell. After taking office, he immediately launched an internal survey of the company and found that the situation was very bad. The whole company is like a train that is about to get out of control and is on the verge of collapse. Not only is the profit situation poor, but it is also carrying billions of dollars in foreign debt. The leadership team has no positive effect, neither can it come up with a process improvement plan that can improve internal efficiency, nor does it have a globalization strategy to open up external markets. There is no idea about the product layout. More serious problems lie ahead. Within a few months of taking office, the finance team reported to him that their profit prospects were not optimistic. Then, in just a few weeks, the company was forced to lower its profit forecast for the second half of the year twice. At that time, securities analysts and investors in the financial world were not optimistic about David Cote, and now they booed even more. One day, as soon as David Cote turned on the TV, he saw a commentator on a business program yelling at him, saying that he was not worthy of running Honeywell at all. Yet David Cote was not crushed. At that time, he said, he developed a new habit of trying to find time to sit alone and put all kinds of stress aside. Spread out the notebook and think carefully about how to bring Honeywell on the right track. At that time, there were two tasks in front of him. On the one hand, to win the future, formulate long-term strategies for product innovation, process improvement, and geographical expansion. On the other hand, to win the present, to give investors some visible returns in the short term. Keep your seat. How can such a contradictory thing be realized? David Cote believes that the key to saving Honeywell from the quagmire is to eliminate the intellectual inertia that prevailed in the company at that time, and establish an intellectually rigorous thinking mode throughout the company. The term intellectual inertia, it is the opposite of intellectual rigor. That is, it is taken for granted that between two seemingly conflicting goals, one can only choose one and give up the other. At that time, Honeywell's executives were focused on short-term performance at the expense of the company's long-term development potential. For example, David Cote found that in order to make the numbers on the financial statements look good and meet the goals for this quarter, executives can be said to be full of tricks. For example, in the last week of the quarter, they will supply distributors with special low prices or give away some products for free to offset their performance. In addition, they will make changes in the accounting books and capitalize the research and development expenses, so that this money is transferred from cost to intangible assets of the company at the moment, or a small amount of money is advanced by suppliers and counted as current income, or even an entire business is sold directly to whitewash the profit statement. Everyone can also imagine what will happen next. When dealers find that there will be price discounts at the end of each quarter, they are no longer willing to place orders early. The research and development expenses that are capitalized now will still be amortized gradually in the next few years. The money advanced by the businessman is received today, but it will be gone tomorrow. Not to mention the act of selling the business, it is simply cutting one's own flesh for money. Many businesses that originally had growth potential have become one-time patches. And just like that, the company's long-term prospects are getting worse. Behind the beautiful quarterly report is Honeywell's core competence that has been gradually hollowed out. Therefore, David Cote's first step is to eradicate these tricks of drinking poison to quench thirst and bring the company's accounting behavior back to reality. He called together hundreds of financial executives from all over the world and announced that he would no longer hold any quarterly goal meetings and no longer make transactions for one-time gains, income generated due to aggressive behavior, put an end to all hypocritical accounting maneuvers. After the order was issued, there was strong opposition from the financial department, and many department leaders also pleaded for the suspension of the order. Some executives chose to leave the company because they could not accept this approach. When communicating with investors, David Cote admitted that Honeywell's performance may not look good in the last 1 or 2 years, but he firmly believes that the company's stock price will usher in a rebound. Some investors chose to believe him, while others sold their shares, and the company's share price fell as a result. But David Cote was unmoved, because he knew that if he left room for maneuver this time, it would be equivalent to digging a big hole for the company, and future performance would face greater pressure. Later, it took them a full 18 months to eliminate all bad accounting strategies, which can be regarded as a behavioral correction of the impact of the previous intellectual inertia. What is more difficult to correct than behavior is thinking. This is a deeper problem. Everyone is used to only staring at short-term performance, and it is difficult to think deeply about the company's business. All work and communication are superficial and deal with. At Honeywell at the time, many meetings became a formality. The team report is filled with all kinds of seemingly high-level technical terms, and piled up with page after page of data charts. Some so-called analysis frameworks are just to hide the fragile logic behind it and create an illusion that the business is booming. And a little digging reveals that many executives simply don't understand their business well, or at all. How to change this situation? David Cote believes that the best way for a leader to mobilize the masses is to show everyone what the right way of thinking should be through personal demonstration. To this end, he adopted the method of asking questions to guide. For example, when a department reports work to him, he doesn't just listen passively, but interrupts and asks questions from time to time to see if the reporter really understands the business and has fully thought about it. Of course, he will be very polite and never boss around. Sometimes, he would create a list of questions for the team to think about before the meeting. In the meeting, he would listen to their answers carefully, then ask more questions, and point it out directly if he was not satisfied with the answers. Also, when arranging a specific project, he will not simply tell the team members what kind of new product we need and what the budget is, and then let them do it. Instead, they will participate in the formulation of project plans and help them establish an intellectual framework for solving problems. The specific method is to listen to their ideas first, and then ask probing questions, such as, how do you determine which new products to invest in and which ones to discard? Who are you going to put in charge of product development? How do you ensure that the technical staff interacts with the marketing team? Etc. David Cote has had personal experience with these problems. Many of them are bad experiences he has experienced before. Therefore, while asking questions, he is actually imparting experience to the employees. In every day of work, he insists on inquiring about business with such a polite and persistent attitude, bit by bit to leverage the intellectual inertia in the original thinking of employees and improve their ability to solve specific problems. At the same time, he will also consciously help employees build intellectually rigorous thinking, urging them to spend more time thinking about a longer-term picture when making every decision. For example, when some executives assessed how much of their current business could be outsourced, they initially thought that only 5% could be outsourced. But after some questioning, David Cote found that this was because they felt that the cost of outsourcing their business was too high, and the reason for such an idea was that they did not build a longer-term picture in their minds. When you factor in the long-term costs of managing these businesses, as well as the hidden costs of eroding a company's ability to adapt, the equation becomes very different. According to David Cote's experience, 30% to 70% of an organization's work can be outsourced. Beyond these specific issues, it is even more important to build intellectual rigor into a company's strategic planning. Every July, Honeywell's various business lines report to the CEO. After listening to the report for the first time, David Cote found that these business leaders had no concept of the development plan for the next 5 years, and they would only talk about it to please the boss, regardless of whether those goals could be achieved or not, and how to achieve them. The cost required. In the words of David Cote, in short, these reports are bullshit. The reason for this is that, at that time, every 2 years or so, the leaders of each business line would rotate. Under this arrangement, they will naturally think that when I face the CEO, I will tell him a long-term story that he finds interesting, and then go back to work and continue to complete my short-term results. So later, David Cote asked these business leaders to not only think about the development of the business in the next 5 years, but also make a plan for the next fiscal year when proposing a strategic plan. And, in the months before the July report, David Cote will start to communicate these plans with them, ask them for their ideas, and give his own opinions. In this way, when the official report is made in July, the operational planning of these business leaders for the next fiscal year will be more feasible. On this basis, their forecasts for 5-year financial performance will also become more realistic. And when it comes to November, when it is time to finalize the budget for the coming year, David Cote will also ask the leaders of each business line not to give up investment in the future while achieving short-term goals. These are all manifestations of the combination of long-term and short-term perspectives. In this way, David Cote has spent many years cultivating the intellectual rigor of the employees bit by bit, and only then has he implemented the idea of long-term and short-term considerations. Sometimes, he hears some employees talking about doing 2 seemingly contradictory things at the same time. Whenever this happens, he feels relieved. The second part. Just now we talked about how David Cote guides employees to make strategic plans. So how do they formulate a strategic plan that balances short-term growth and long-term development? He summed up a method suitable for most enterprises, which can be summarized as gradual reorganization. This method requires enterprises to promote profit growth while maintaining fixed costs, and then use the surplus funds brought about by profit growth for the long-term development of the enterprise. It may sound a bit abstract. Let's talk about how Honeywell's gradual reorganization was carried out. Let's look at this half sentence first. On the premise of keeping fixed costs unchanged, promote profit growth. It's a strategy that pays off immediately and brings growth in the short term. How to achieve it? According to David Cote's experience, in most companies, labor costs account for 70% to 80% of fixed costs. Therefore, controlling the number of people is the key to keeping fixed costs constant. Many times, when company executives think about how to promote profit growth, they have two ideas. One is to increase some manpower and do more things. The other is to reduce costs by laying off employees or shutting down some businesses. However, if you want to keep the fixed costs unchanged, you have to find a third way to find ways to reduce costs and improve efficiency while keeping the number of existing employees basically unchanged. Therefore, David Cote decided to improve the existing production process. The strategy is to give full play to the ingenuity of frontline employees and let them participate in the process improvement. The idea came from his experience as an hourly worker in a factory when he was young. At that time, he found that the vast majority of workers were very self-motivated, and they all hoped to use their wisdom to help the company improve its processes. However, they lack a formal voice in a traditional manufacturing environment. David Cote found that, in many cases, factory process reforms mainly rely on the factory leaders to slap their heads. Maybe a leader read a book on the weekend and announced on Monday morning that he found the fundamental problem of the process, but it is not practical to wait until he practices it. If Honeywell allows frontline employees to participate in process improvement, not only can it actually improve inefficient or unreasonable processes, but it can also motivate employees. However, there is a problem here, that is, any improvement must be an overall company-wide action, and authority cannot be delegated to individual business lines or factories and let them act on their own. So later, David Cote led the team to design a process improvement system that can be implemented uniformly in all factories, so that the ingenuity of frontline employees can be deposited into the wealth of experience of the entire company. The biggest highlight of this system is that workers in factories around the world can monitor the situation through daily meetings, find problems, and promote continuous improvement of the process. At the meeting, from the workshop workers to the factory leaders, they discussed how the previous problems were solved, what are the key problems that need to be dealt with urgently, how to improve, and so on. After the system was implemented in Honeywell factories around the world, it saved the company a lot of money. For example, in Shanghai, China, workers designed a new type of cutting tool, which can reduce the contact between workers and sharp blades and reduce the risk of injury for workers. In Nantong, China, workers built a new water storage tank and water pump system. The water in the process can be reused, which is not only environmentally friendly, but also saves $30,000 per year. In Pune, India, a local factory installed solar panels on the roof of the factory building, which can meet 18% of the factory's electricity demand and save about $70,000 per year. Incremental process improvements like this are a gentler, safer way to go than aggressive business expansion or one-off drastic cost reductions. This style is reflected everywhere in David Cote's strategic planning. For example, when they were going to reduce the 37 factories of the sensor business to 12, they did not shut down the remaining 25 factories in one go, because this may cost a lot of restructuring expenses, hundreds of workers, because this may disrupt the normal rhythm of operations. They still adopt the idea of gradual reorganization. It took 10 years to close these 25 factories one after another, and only carry out small-scale layoffs every year, and during this period, they continued to improve the R&D and production processes. In doing so, not only can the annual performance be maintained at a good level, but also their sensor business can go from good to great. David Cote said that while keeping fixed costs stable, improving the company's current situation through a series of small restructuring programs can allow you to achieve operational efficiency by doing only a little more each year. Promote. What we said above is how Honeywell promotes profit growth while keeping fixed costs unchanged. So how are the profits accumulated in this way used? David Cote said that part of it, they will give back to investors, allowing them to see the company's growth in the short term, but more importantly, as we mentioned earlier, take most of the profits to lay out the company's long-term development, such as investment and mergers, opening up new business lines, increasing R&D investment, and global market expansion, etc. These operations are relatively common in corporate strategy, but some of the concepts that Honeywell has embodied in the process of implementing them are more worthy of our attention. For example, David Cote emphasized that customer experience is the foundation of all growth. Whether it's R&D, business development, or global expansion, if you can't please your current customers, then the progress you're making in other growth areas means nothing. Because while you are gaining new customers, you are also losing many old customers. Therefore, Honeywell's research and development direction is not to launch more new products, but to launch good products that better meet the needs of users. However, at that time, most company executives underestimated the value of insight into customer needs. They were often reluctant to let engineers spend more time dealing with customers, and only wanted them to focus on technology development. Therefore, David Cote launched a brand campaign called Honeywell User Experience, setting a goal to make Honeywell the Apple in the industrial sector. That is to say, like Apple, to discover customer needs and integrate them into product design. In order to achieve this goal, they hired guidance consultants, recruited a lot of talents in user experience, set up a special user experience studio, and began to hold user experience courses for company executives, and also carried out user experience in the company every quarter. Design competition. For example, they have developed a console for industrial facilities that operators can use to visually monitor the plant and intervene in case of problems. But these control panels are complicated and difficult to use, so they sent a team of technical experts and user experience experts into the customer's factory to see how the operators of these oil refineries, chemical plants, and paper mills use the controls. Stage. In the process, they discovered that these consoles could be greatly simplified, making them as intuitive and usable as the iPhone. So, they redesigned the console to not only display operational problems in real time, but also prompt the operator which preset program to use to correct the problem in a timely and safe manner, and this new console is also ergonomic. In addition, from small jet engines to commercial cockpit avionics, from security systems to barcode scanning, from warehouse automation to refining and petrochemical technology, they have optimized multiple product lines based on customer experience. What we just said is an important concept that Honeywell adheres to in the process of laying out long-term growth. Customer experience is the foundation of all growth. At the same time, their long-term layout of investment, expansion, and research and development is also gradual, investing in the future without rushing. For example, when it comes to promoting the expansion of the global market, the original idea of the executives was to go all out and make joint ventures or acquisitions around the world to expand their influence. But David Cote believes that such an average force may eventually accomplish nothing. A better approach is to focus on breakthroughs and proceed step by step. He suggested to focus on high-growth regions first, especially China and India, because they will become the leaders of high economic growth. The company can build a bridgehead in these two countries first, and then replicate the successful experience elsewhere. Next, let's focus on Honeywell's entry into China. Before 2005, Honeywell's business in China progressed very slowly, which made David Cote a headache. They didn't figure out what the problem was until a newcomer with a better understanding of the situation in China joined and began to take over the business in China. It turns out that when most Western companies entered China, they did not understand the actual situation clearly, and just copied the Western market. They usually capture only a small slice of the high-end market, but their products are impractical and too expensive for China's massive mid-range market. Chinese customers pay more attention to cost performance and don't care about those flashy high-end functions. Although some local competing products are not so sophisticated, their quality is good enough and their prices are much lower, so they are naturally more popular among Chinese consumers. Knowing this, in 2004, Honeywell formulated a strategy called Becoming a Chinese Competitor. David Cote requires that everything the company does in the Chinese market, from marketing, management, design, manufacturing to procurement, must be localized, and the progress of localization must be quantitatively assessed. To promote this strategy, he also gave himself a Chinese name Gao Dewei, and he also put a statue of Guangdong and a Chinese tripod in the office of the U.S. headquarters. David Cote asked Honeywell's executives in China to find out their strongest Chinese competitors, study how they did it and why they did it, and never repeat the mistakes of other Western companies. This strategy has improved Honeywell's performance in China. To give a specific example, at that time they had a subsidiary company that made hydrogen purification equipment. Before that, they had been designing products according to Western standards. As a result, they lost more than 100 bids in China. After research, they found out that the quality standards in China are as high as those in the West, but in China, the technological iteration of products is relatively fast, and consumers do not need products to have a long lifespan. Therefore, they adjusted the design according to the preferences of Chinese consumers, and later won more than one-third of the bidding projects. Since 2005, the performance of Honeywell China has entered a stage of explosive growth. By 2020, China has become Honeywell's largest market outside the United States, with annual sales of nearly $3 billion. Since 2010, they have started to replicate their successful experience in China to other high-growth regions, using the localization strategy to open up markets in more places. David Cote said that the localization strategy sounds like common sense, but in fact it is often unknown. This is especially true for many Western companies that have always considered themselves at the forefront of their industries. From this perspective, Honeywell's localization strategy also seems to have a sense of calmness and bending into the game. So far, we've said a lot about initiatives for long-term growth. But David Cote reminds us that we still have to remember the saying, invest in the future, but don't act too hastily. When faced with multiple growth initiatives, don't make efforts at the same time and attack everywhere. Prioritization is very important. Before starting to act, we must first evaluate our own strengths and weaknesses, determine the most promising growth direction, and make targeted efforts. In the rest of the book, David Cote also describes how they dealt with the Great Recession in the United States in 2008 and achieved explosive performance growth after the recession ended. Under the circumstances, it can still take into account both long-term and short-term performance. These contents, we will not expand this episode of the program. Interested friends can find the original book for further reading. Now, let's recap the highlights. According to David Cote, short-termism is one of the most harmful prevailing ideas in business today. Short-term performance and long-term development are regarded by many as a set of contradictions, but intellectual rigor thinking tells us that companies can take both goals into consideration. In order to implement intellectually rigorous thinking throughout Honeywell, David Cote helped employees eliminate intellectual inertia through in-depth and continuous questioning guidance, and gradually established a long-term and short-term thinking mode. Under the guidance of this kind of thinking, Honeywell has formulated a set of methods that take into account the short-term performance and long-term development of the enterprise, which is called gradual restructuring. This method requires enterprises to promote profit growth while maintaining fixed costs, and then use the surplus funds brought about by profit growth for the long-term development of the enterprise. Compared with the change strategy of radical expansion or sharp contraction, gradual reorganization is a more moderate and safe way of doing things, and it is also a very typical practical strategy under the guidance of intellectual rigor. David Cote applied this strategy to the company's overall strategy and almost all business lines, and achieved remarkable results. Honeywell's operating margin improved from about 8% in 2003 to 16% in 2018, and sales have nearly doubled. Many securities analysts who were not optimistic about Honeywell before this have even turned into firm believers in the gradual restructuring strategy. It took Honeywell more than 10 years to go from decline to excellence. Most companies and most people are unlikely to achieve a gorgeous transformation all at once, but need to move forward on a quarterly and yearly basis. In the words of David Cote, you need to plow and sow, but you also need to water and care for the crops for years and years, and there are no shortcuts here. And this may be the most simple truth that the long-termism in this book hopes to tell us. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.